Have you ever looked at the world and wondered why some power structures just seem unshakable, almost invisible? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain using the ideas of a brilliant theorist named Antonio Gramsci. And believe it or not, he figured out the secret to modern power while locked away in a prison cell. So, picture this. It's the early 20th century, and for revolutionaries, there's this massive puzzle that nobody can solve. The communist revolution they'd been waiting for, it actually happened, but in rural agrarian Russia in 1917. It completely fizzled out in the industrial powerhouses of the West, places like Italy, Germany, and Britain. So the billion-dollar question was, why? And maybe the most powerful answer came from this guy, Antonio Gramsci. He wasn't just some academic. He was a founder and leader of the Italian Communist Party. In 1926, he was arrested by Mussolini's fascist regime and was told, "We must stop this brain from functioning." Well, they failed. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, but his brain kept working. From that prison cell, with guards watching his every move, Gramsci got to work solving that riddle. He filled more than 30 notebooks with his thoughts, which had to be smuggled out. These would become one of the most influential political texts of the entire century, his famous prison notebooks. Gramsci's big realization was that the old theories were just incomplete. The traditional Marxist idea that power was all about economic control and brute force, the army and the police, was missing something huge. He knew the modern state was way more sophisticated, way more resilient than that. He needed a new theory. And his solution was this truly game-changing idea that flipped the script on how we understand power. It's a kind of power that works not just on our bodies, but inside our own minds. He gave it a name: hegemony. Now this is the key. Hegemony isn't just about beating people into submission. It's a much smarter form of control. It's when the ruling class gets everyone else to see the world through their eyes. They make their own interests seem like simple, natural, common sense. And when that happens, people willingly, actively consent to the system that keeps them down. To help us wrap our heads around this, Gramsci used this absolutely brilliant analogy. He said, don't think of the state as just one thing. Instead, picture it as a medieval defense system. You've got the central fortress, sure, but it's surrounded by a huge, sprawling network of defenses, the moat. And this is where it gets really clever. He breaks the state into two spheres. The fortress is what he calls political society. This is the heavy-handed stuff: the police, the military, the legal system. It rules through force, or what he called domination. But the real strength lies in the moat, or civil society. This is the whole network of seemingly private institutions: our schools, the media we consume, churches, you name it. This is where consent is built. This is the kingdom of hegemony. And in the West, Gramsci argued, that moat is so wide and deep you can't even get near the fortress. Okay, so if the state is this complex machine of both force and consent, you can't just charge at it head-on with pitchforks. You need a totally new game plan. And Gramsci, always the strategist, used military terms to lay it out. He said any movement for change has to be smart. It has to look at the society it's in and ask, are we fighting just a fortress? Or are we fighting a fortress that's protected by this incredibly powerful moat of ideas? And that led to his famous distinction between two kinds of struggle. On one hand, you have the war of maneuver. That's what happened in Russia. It was a swift, direct assault on the state. Because its civil society, its moat, was pretty weak. But in the West, he argued, you need a war of position. This is a long, slow, grinding siege. The goal isn't to take the palace overnight. The goal is to fight and win in the trenches of culture, in schools, in the arts, in the media, to slowly build a whole new common sense, a counter-hegemony. Now, what's just amazing is that these ideas, born from analyzing class struggle in Europe, were picked up decades later and given this powerful new life. People realized Gramsci's framework didn't just explain power inside a country. It was the perfect lens for understanding the quiet, pervasive power of global colonialism. To understand that leap, we need a key piece of Gramsci's vocabulary, a word he often used to get past his prison censors: the subaltern. It's his term for any group on the margins: the peasants, the workers, anyone who is shut out from the official structures of power. And for post-colonial thinkers, a light bulb went off. They realized the colonized person was the ultimate global subaltern. A key figure who made this connection was the brilliant scholar Edward Said. He argued that Western empires weren't just held up by guns and soldiers. No, they were propped up by a massive cultural hegemony, a kind of cultural imperialism that controlled knowledge itself,
shaping the very way the West imagined and talked about the rest of the world.
This quote from Said just nails it. The real power, he argued, is the power to tell the story. The West held on to its dominance by controlling the narrative, by defining the Orient, for example, as something exotic, irrational, and fundamentally inferior. It was a global war of position, fought in novels, history books, and museums. But this raises a really difficult, even painful question. If these marginalized groups, the subaltern, are so systematically silenced and written out of the story, can they ever actually speak for themselves? Or is their voice always going to be twisted or co-opted by the very power structures that oppress them? The theorist Gayatri Spivak tackled this head-on. She pointed out that the word representation has a double meaning. There's political representation, like an official speaking for you, and then there's portrayal, how your story is represented in history or art. Spivak's tough conclusion was that the subaltern is denied both. They are caught in a trap, structurally silenced, and any attempt by a well-meaning intellectual to give them a voice might, ironically, just silence them all over again. So, after all that, from an Italian prison to post-colonial theory, what's the takeaway for us, here and now? Well, Gramsci's ideas aren't just for dusty textbooks. They are a live, powerful toolkit for making sense of the world around us. So here's how you can use this toolkit. Next time you're watching the news or scrolling online, think about hegemony. Ask yourself, which ideas are being presented as just neutral common sense? Recognize that big social debates are a war of position, a long-term battle over ideas. And most importantly, always ask about the subaltern. Whose perspective isn't in this story? Whose voice is missing? So I'll leave you with this to think about. The next time you come across an idea that just feels obvious, like it's simply the way things are, just pause for a second. Ask yourself, where did this common sense come from? And, the most important question of all, who does it really benefit?